All right, like call the committee of the whole meeting for Monday, February 6th, 2023 to order. Roll call, please.
Mayor Gaffino.
Here.
Trustee Carroll.
Here.
Trustee Curtis.
Here.
Trustee Gately.
Here.
Trustee Lowry.
Here.
Trustee Nedved.
Here. Okay, no one signed up for audience comments, trustee comments. Seeing none, discussion item 1, Mike.
Hey, thank you, Mayor. Item number 1 is a TIF request, a TIF reimbursement request. The property owner at 307 South Lincoln Way has approached the village. They're looking for financial assistance from the Route 31 TIF district. Obviously, since 2021, the Route 31 TIF district is everything south of 88. The 307 South Lincoln Way is the property directly north of Edens on the east side of Route 31 between Edens and the tollway. He's requesting $66,167 from the Route 31 TIF. The request falls out of the parameter of the Route 31 TIF Aside Grant Program, but the village has historically entertained requests from the TIF district itself. But with that, what I would do is go ahead and allow the property owner to come up, give his presentation, and I will at the end address any other holes in the information or kind of look for some direction from the village board on this. Ultimately what we do, because if we come back, we'd probably have to come back with some sort of TIF reimbursement agreement for village further review from the village board. So Al, if you want to come on up.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and trustees. My name is Al Broholm. I live at 518 Bead Circle. I've lived in North Aurora for about 35 years. Mike, did everybody have this picture
Yes.
with them? Okay. I want to spend a couple of minutes at telling you how I got to this position of needing a curb cut for this property. And let me pass out something. Thank you.
We can share. You can share if you want. I don't know. Okay.
Mike Toff wrote a beautiful discussion piece, and I trust you have all reviewed this and read it, and attached to that, he had the information that I submitted to him. What he didn't have was an explanation of how I got to this point where I need a curb cut for this property. That sheet I gave you shows what was existing before I purchased this land. In the yellow part is the subject lot that we're talking about. And you see there's 2 lots north of there. Those 2 lots don't exist anymore, but they did when I started to assemble these 3 pieces in 23 years ago. I was going to buy all 3 of these pieces and build an antique mall on it. And I actually bought the subject property, and I bought the northernmost piece designated as 005 on that. And then I was negotiating with the woman that owned the piece in the middle. And that piece in the middle years ago had a home on it. The home was built 50 some years ago. And there was a woman that lived in it. And I was in negotiations with her about buying that property. While I was in negotiations with her, the state approached both of us and asked me and her if they could do soil tests on our property. The reason was the state was considering buying all 3 properties so that they could make a direct entrance onto the east-west tollway. If you were northbound on Lincoln Way, you would just make a right turn to get on the tollway rather than make a left turn like we do now. And the reason is when you make that left turn, and this drawing doesn't show it, but the picture does. When you make the left turn and go down on that entrance ramp, it's got a very tight turn and it actually doesn't meet federal standards. And the state wanted to cure that so that the radius of the turn to get on was legal for trucks. They never did correct that because they were going to correct it by making a direct entrance on the tollway. So they ran soil tests on my property and on the one next door. And then ultimately they sent us offers to buy the lot that I own to the north and the woman who had the house there. And they decided not to buy my property. Now, when I was assembling these three people, the lot in the middle had a curb cut. And my intent was to use that curb cut when I developed this property. Ultimately, the state came in and they overbid me radically and they bought her house and they bought the lot north of it that I owned. They offered a ridiculously low amount. I ended up going to court and I made them condemn it. And then I got a little more money out of it. But the net result of all that was shortly after I bought the current lot, I couldn't do anything with it because the state was going to make this new entrance for the tollway. Now, this is going back 23 years ago. For 10 years, I couldn't do anything with this property because the tollway was expanding the bridge and they wouldn't let me apply for a curb cut because they said, no, you can't do anything there. And it wasn't until 2010 before I could do anything with this property. And by 2010, then they says, okay, you can develop it. I approached the state about getting a curb cut. And that's when I found out that there was a restriction on the property because the previous owner had, in fact, sold a curb cut to the state because the plan in the 60s was to make Route 31 a freeway. Hard to believe that they were going to make that a freeway, but that plan never went through and the plan died. I ended up buying a property. The people I bought it from never told me that it had a restriction on the curb cut. And the title policy that I got did not mention it at all. So in my attorney that represented me, he said the title looks good. And it was true because the title policy did not show that this property was restricted and you couldn't get a curb cut on it. So I went through the whole process of getting a curb cut back in 2010. And they did the whole process and it came back. And at that time, there was no market for commercial property. If you could think back, there was not a lot of commercial development in North Aurora from 2010 until maybe 2020, it started. So for all those years, I had this property for sale. I didn't proceed to get the curb cut because I didn't have an extra $77,000 in my checking account to reacquire the access right to it. And so I had somebody come up and wanted to buy it and put a marijuana store in there 3 years ago. I negotiated a purchase contract with it, and 4 days before closing, they backed out of the deal because they didn't want to go through the rigmarole of getting a curb cut from the state. And I told them it's going to take you a year, and they couldn't wait. So after that deal folded, I said, I'll take it upon myself. I'll reapply again. I did. And I reapplied a little more than 2 years ago. And it took the state almost 2 years to go through their process and come back to me and tell me how much they wanted to release access to the property. Their excuse was because of COVID, they didn't have any employees, and it was a 2-year process. I'm glad I did it. I'm through it. I finally got a letter from the state telling me, yes, here you could have the access back if you pay us $66,000. And by the way, send us a check yesterday. I got that notification about a week or week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. So I'm here requesting that the village, through the TIF fund this $66,000 and change, because without that curb cut, this property will never be developed. I have approached the adjacent property owner and he has no interest in it. And then behind me is the river and the river doesn't need it. And next door to me is the tollway property and the tollway doesn't want this property. They screwed over me 10 years ago when they didn't buy it and tied me up for 10 years that I couldn't do anything with it. So now I'm at the point, the market has turned around. There's new retail being built all over. And I think I could sell this property, but I need a curb cut. And I think requesting money from the TIF fund is a legitimate use of the TIF funding. I see Tesca agrees with my argument, saying it's a legitimate use of TIF funds to fund getting the curb cut. Without the curb cut, this land will stay vacant. I would like to develop this or sell it, preferably sell it.
What is it in 007? Is that your lot that on this map here? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes.
No.
307. That's the lot now. See, they took those other two lots that they condemned both of those properties and they built, if you look on the Technicolor picture you have in front of you, instead of building the new access to the tollway, they built a retention pond there. So it took them about 7 years to figure out that they didn't want to make the new entrance to the tollway. Instead, they wanted to build a retention pond. And through that, I was in constant contact with them. And I was handcuffed for 10 years. I couldn't do anything with this property except pay taxes on it. And to this day, I pay taxes, $2,000 and some a year for a vacant piece of property that I can't use. And I'd sure like to develop it, but they took, the previous owner took the curb cut away, sold it to the state, never told me, and the title company missed it. And so I have no other recourse other than this has to be paid or I'll never get a curb cut there.
Well, I like to see a building on there, so I'd be in favor of that. I think it is good use of the money. I do believe a building would look nicer, whatever the building is better than an empty lot. So I would be in favor of that.
Yeah, I would too. I think it'd be an advantage to the village to build something there rather than have all those empty lots down there.
I have some questions. How, maybe Mark can answer this. How do you not see something like that in a title search, first of all? And secondly, I don't know that it's the village's role to make somebody's land whole when we have a legal remedy to it. I mean, is this going to happen now for anybody on Route 31 that has an adverse condition to their property that they're going to come to us to try to fix it?
Can I come closer? I cannot hear you.
I said, how could this have even happened when you bought the property that the title search came up with? It didn't show that it had that restriction to it. And secondly, I don't know that it's the village's job to make whole the situation. So now everybody on Route 31 that might have an adverse condition, is it our job to remedy it?
Somebody pulled some hanky panky, either the owner of the property or he was in cahoots with the title company. I have a copy of the title policy that came from what is it? Chicago Title and Trust issued the title policy, and it makes absolutely no mention of this restriction on the
Right,
property.
so it's their error. So why aren't you going after them for negligence?
Okay, the reason I don't go after them is I discovered this about 2 years after I bought the property. The state kept telling me, and they kept telling me for four or 5 years, that they were going to buy the property. I didn't need a curb cut because the state was going to buy the property, so I did not pursue it. And then I couldn't do anything, and I couldn't even apply for a curb cut because the state told me I couldn't do anything with this property until all the construction was done, widening and extending the bridge. I have letters that I can show you, and I think I gave them to Mike, that shows the letters that I wrote to the state. I was in contact with them. I was in contact with the attorney because I personally knew the attorney that was working for the tollway. He formerly was an attorney for the city of Aurora. Then he went to work for the tollway, and he and I, we were friends and we were in contact. And he kept telling me, you can't do anything with the property because the tollway is eventually going to buy it. And when they didn't, then the excuse was you can't do anything because even though we're building this retention pond until we get that completed and the entire bridge project is done, you can't do anything with it.
So
I think this is a one of a kind, Laura. I don't know that there's any other property in North Aurora that has this situation. So
You're currently trying to sell it for 300,000, correct?
pardon?
You're currently trying to sell it for 300,000, correct? So 300,000, you're requesting 60 something thousand. Do you have a projected increase in the value if we foot the bill to put the curb cut in?
I always figured I would discount the sales price, whatever it costs to get the curb cut approved. I had a contract with the marijuana people for $242,000 to sign contract.
Al, can you go back to your mic so we can pick you up on the recording?
Yeah,
Thank
okay.
you.
I had a signed contract for 242,000, which to me was fair because it was going to cost 60 to 70,000 to get the curb cut. So I was getting full price for the property.
I have a questions for Steve or Mike. The property falls in a TIF district, correct?
Yes,
He's eligible for the funding.
yes.
And how much do we have in a fund?
If you look on page 2 of the current fund balance is $1.4 million
Okay, well, I think that's so you look,
projected to be in May, I
I
believe.
mean, the property falls in the area. We have over $1 million in the fund. And that money is to be used to help business and create business opportunities. So rather than a vacant lot, we could have a nice building on a kind of a blighted area. So
I'm not saying
We're
I'm
ready.
against paying anything. I don't think we should foot the entire bill though. I mean, we're now adding value to a property.
we're adding value to the community in that blighted area. That's how I view it.
Anybody else?
So if this was to go through and you get a business out there, I'm assuming we would start earning or funding the TIF or back into the TIF more than what it's creating now, correct? Assuming a business goes
The
in there.
property's paying into it. The problem is the fact that the TIF expires in only about 3 years. So by the time you would get something built and then assessed and then to get on an actual increment tax roll, there probably wouldn't be any increment put it back into the district because the district itself is expiring soon.
Okay.
For clarification, this is in the original section of the North Lincoln, or excuse me, the Lincoln Way TIF. When we created the United TIF, we left a section that is south of 88 into the original TIF to expire in 3 years. The rest of the TIF districts still have 21, 22 years on it, but not that section.
Is this the only lot that's south of 88 that's vacant?
No.
Hmm.
There's one south of Edens. Isn't there an empty lot there? Mike had that house or two that was torn down.
Yeah, we had some homes torn down. There's a vacant commercial lot available. I know directly south of the Firestone as well.
And I think we paid TIF money to tear those down, didn't we?
We did. We
Yeah.
used the facade grant money for those 2 vacant homes.
Are there any issues with curb cuts that people in those lots would be coming back to us?
To
later
my
on?
knowledge,
say
right,
no.
not that I know of right now.
I think we have the money and I think I'd be okay with it, but I would like to see us maybe split the difference a little bit. It doesn't have to be 50-50, but I think we can. I think the property owner is gonna get, Al, you're gonna get something when you sell the lot. I do agree with trustees Gately and Lowry that I'd rather see something developed there than an empty lot, but I think, you know, if we could do a 70-30 split or something like that.
Well, what I didn't tell you is shortly after I bought this lot, Mike Glock, your predecessor, approached me about having unlimited access. In the middle of this lot, there's a sewer that the city needs to get to once a year. So I had Attorney Drendel draw up an access easement for the village so that they wouldn't have to call me and ask me every time they wanted to go on the property. I submitted with that a copy of that. And at the time I was a village trustee, and we had another member who was a village trustee who actually worked for the DuPage County Assessor's Office. And I donated that access to the village, and the trustee who worked for DuPage, I said, could you give me an opinion of value? And he said, yes, that access is worth about $70,000. I donated that to the village a long time ago. I didn't ask for any money. I did ask about 2 years ago, thinking that it might be easier to sell if that access wasn't on there. And I called and John says, no, we don't want to give that up. So the village wouldn't give it back to me, even though they didn't pay for it. But in my mind, take that into consideration. I gave them a $70,000 easement for free in 1921. That's a recorded easement. I have a picture of all of that. So
I'm fine with the 66. I mean, it really, in the big scheme of thing, isn't really that much money, and it's a benefit to the village. They're kind of splitting hairs when we got so much money available. It's there. The money is for business, to create business. That's why we have a TIF.
What is our policy now? Isn't it a matching TIF grant? I mean, do we typically pay 100%?
So the TIF facade grant itself, which extends both in the United and the Route 31 TIF, that's the actual program itself, which has defined guidelines for reimbursable improvements, more or less like facade enhancements, parking lot improvements, landscaping. It has sort of a prescribed use for that program itself. That is a 50% match up to $20,000. So if someone came in, they wanted to do $70,000 with improvements, we would give them $20,000. If they came in with 20, we would give them 10. So it's 50% up to $20,000 for that facade grant
So
program.
this isn't normal, doing 100%, picking up 100% of the fee. And what bothers me about this is not an established business, it's land. Land is not generating any income. So to say, I mean, they've been paying into this TIF. I mean, it's going to be a net withdrawal. There hasn't been anything put into it. And now we're doing above and beyond and doing 100% payout. Like I said, I'm not against paying anything, but I do think we need to be fair to all the other people that apply for the same grants.
We've given TIF district, I'll just use Mocha as an example, $250,000. And Mocha, we really saved them. If we didn't give them that money, he probably wouldn't have been in business. So you got to remember, Route 31 is one of those tough areas for us to get any business. If we can give $250,000 of Mocha Coffee to pay for their sidewalks and some of the repair work, we can afford $66,000 for a curb cut for a building that's going to enhance the view when you enter into North Aurora.
Well, the other option is if we're afraid of creating a precedent, then we could, as a village, choose to just pay you for the easement, $66,000 for the easement that you had previously donated, but never received any consideration for, couldn't we?
Sure. That would involve getting all kind of appraisals and then you'd have to get an appraisal of what was that easement worth in 2001.
Well, but no.
22 years ago.
I mean, couldn't you use today's value of the easement? I mean, I'm okay with the $66,000. I think
Thank you.
that we need to have something there. I know I've been in North Aurora for 18 years. That's been an empty lot with the for sale sign for 18 years. So I'm okay with the $66,000. I was just throwing out an option that if we were trying to avoid setting a precedent, then maybe we could pay for the easement that he's already given.
I agree with Trustee Gately, though. I mean, 31's an oddball to begin with. So, I mean, I'm in favor of it as well. It does look, that whole area really needs help and it is different. It's undeveloped. I mean, it could take 5 years to sell it, or who knows, or somebody could buy it and they don't develop it. But it's one of those things, like Mark mentioned, Mocha, we helped them out. We bought the property. We paid for some extra cleanup, you know, and just to kind of generate some interest up and down 31. So,
Look at Mocha. I mean, I go by there.
yeah,
He's got business. I mean, he almost didn't make it. We pulled him out.
yeah,
And that's what that's what
that's
the
what
tip
the money's
is
for. Yeah.
Yeah, my opinion is, I'm guessing if we didn't do this, Al, you probably wouldn't sell the property. You'd sit on it for another 20 some years. So, I understand what Laura, where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I just think that, you know, the TIF is exactly, this is the exact type of situation what the TIF is for. So I'd be a favor for it.
You know, and knowing that, like I said before, we'd have to have some sort of reimbursement agreement, you know, and I put in the memo just some questions at the very end, you know, is there anything else that you would want to see as part of that agreement? We brought it back. I know when we did the Mocha one, that was 2019. They had brought in some eligible expenses, and I think it exceeded $200,000. We gave them $200,000 over the course of 5 years at $40,000 a year. That's what that ended up being. And that was basically at the request of, and I think they came in with like 232 in eligible expenses. Back in 2019 as well, we awarded Space Center. They were doing a phase 2 environmental on the golf course property. They came in with multiple bids for the phase 2 environmental, and they were, I think it was to the tune of like maybe $60-some thousand, but the low bid was $31,885, which we awarded that, saying that, you know, at that point in time, there was no difference in the environmental study. So we awarded them the not to exceeds based upon the low bid value. So we do have some precedents here with agreements that are outside of the actual TIF grant program, but they've always been a little bit different in how we've awarded the funding. But with that too, is there any other stipulations that you'd want to see with the potential agreement if we were to move forward with this?
Can we restrict them from coming back?
Yeah, we did that. As I put in the memo, we did that for Mocha. We basically said that you cannot come back for any future financial requests on that property. And the property had to be in good standing, with our local ordinances, state laws, and everything else too. So that was a stipulation we put in that agreement.
I would agree to that.
Would that be restricted just to current owner or future owner as well?
I'm assuming we probably could want to restrict that to future owners as well, extend that.
Yeah, I don't know that I want to do that. I was just,
Because that would put a limitation or a cap on the amount, because if someone came in, they wanted to develop the property, they too could ask for TIF money, but if they were to get this money to at least get the curb cut in, we could put a cap on this amount as well, and then they could not make a future TIF request. Because that
Would that hurt the sale of the property?
well, I was going to say, I wouldn't want to do that to the future owner. I would want to limit it to just the current owner on that. That's my thought on it. I won't want to penalize the next owner to at least come back and have to ask or want to ask, and I'd be okay with that.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
No, I want to clarify on that.
Yes.
So are we coming back with a restriction or not a restriction?
I think the restriction is just for the current owner.
Just for
Just
current
for the
owner.
Current owner? Okay.
Or what if Al partners up and develops the property? I think it should be if Al or any group of investor and he's still an owner, it should restrict that group unless he sells the property to a new owner.
So it has to get, okay, so no restriction, is restriction on the current owner, new owner, no restriction.
Right, as long as Al doesn't have an interest in the property. That's how I feel about it.
Well, very good. I'm glad we came to a consensus for at least most of us. I think it's, I know I can just imagine dealing with the state, just like I remember when we had a small repair down here where it was, I don't know, we did some work or the state did some work. And there was a horse out there for literally a year. 1 year this horse was out there. And I think it was Max Herwig says, well, you know somebody at the state, get them to fix the road, you know? I'm like, okay, well, I don't know. I'll find out who the person is. So I called someone with Department of Transportation, and he came on, and then Max started like screaming at the guy. Then he left. And then the sawhorse was there another 6 months. So it's not easy dealing with the state. So I feel the pain, you know?
Yeah.
10 years of, and you're sitting on property, you know, it could be a business there. So happy we can do it for you.
Yep. Good luck, Al. Hope you sell it quick, and
Pardon?
I said, good luck and hope you sell it quick and something that does a lot of sales tax moves in and builds something and all your dreams come true.
So what's the conclusion? I,
You're gonna get the TIF. That's what we're gonna,
Yeah.
the
It
TIF for
sounds
the,
like, it sounds like what we'll be doing is bringing forth an ordinance or a small agreement at the next board meeting outlining the terms we've discussed tonight for a formal approval.
okay. Well, the TIF expires in less than 3 years anyway, so any restrictions on me, hopefully I won't even own it in the near future. I'm getting too old to do this anymore. All right, thank you.
Yep. Have a good night.
thank you, Al.
I should probably mention one thing, since I've represented Al in the past. I'd be representing the village in this, but I'd have to have Al sign off on, representing the village and drafting whatever TIF agreement might be needed. So in other words, I couldn't represent the village with you on the other side, because I've represented you in the past without you signing off.
Do we need? Do we need to waive the conflict as the village trustees?
I think it needs to be out on the table. I don't know that it's a conflict necessarily, but it could be, and probably formally should be, I guess, laid out that way. But if I'm representing the village, I think Al would have to sign it.
Well, but so would we, I think, too. And I'd be willing to do that. I think just to document it.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks,
thank
Al.
you.
I think.
All right. Item 2, under discussion, water rates, Jason.
Yeah, thank you. I know we discussed the water rates at the last board meeting, and the board wanted some additional information just on if we looked at the high users and if there's an additional fee for some of the high users in town or commercial users in town. So we put some information together for you guys tonight. We're going to kind of just start by just recapping where we left off, last board meeting. We presented 2 rate options for the board to consider. The first one being increasing the water rate only. So this would be essentially a 50% over a 5-year span, starting with a 15% rate increase come June 1st of next year. And then we also did a rate option to where it's a lesser rate increase. It's a 10%. And I think over a 5-year span, we maybe are at the 42% range, but we look at that $16 minimum charge and we bump that up to $20 as a minimum charge. So just kind of 2 different ways to essentially generate the same amount of money. We put both options together, saying that at the end of 5 years, we'd kind of be in that 57% reserve within the water fund. And both options assume that we have a large reserve kind of sitting in water right now, just because we've done delay to some capital projects like the water tower not being built. So we've built up a large reserve. We'd be using about 4.7 million of that reserve. Plus, we have the Recovery Act money that we put towards some capital projects within. So we're really using some additional funds to kind of help soften, even though it's a big number for that rate increase, we're helping soften it even more. The board preferred.
Sorry, Jason, real quick. And that's assuming that when we come back for obligation of the ARPA funds, that the board obligates it to that fund. Right now, they're not obligated. So that's assuming that the board is on board with putting that 2.4 million in the water fund.
So the board preferred not touching that $16 bi-monthly first 3,000 gallons. Really is just kind of a way of maybe that's like could be considered like a senior rate, because a lot of the people that use that just don't use a lot of water. So we wouldn't really be passing a rate increase on to them. We just making sure that they're staying at their $16. I do have one correction though. At the last meeting, I mentioned that approximately 1,800 users fall within that 0 to 3,000 range. I got that number incorrect. I pulled the wrong numbers. It's actually 882 users. But on top of that, there's another 519 that really only use 4,000. So they get billed for, one extra 1,000, so they would be seeing a 56 cent increase. And then there's another 522 users that are usually in that 5,000 gallons. So they see an extra 2,000 gallons. So they'd be seeing more of a $1 increase. So those 3 together is kind of where I got that other number. I just had written that number down wrong. Again, the water rate history, water rates changed in 2010 last time. The $16 bi-monthly first 3,000 charge used to be $10.90. And then we increased the actual usage rate from $3.41 to $3.55 per thousand. Those rates stayed the same until 2018, where the water rate increased from the $3.55 to $3.70. But to kind of offset that, we reduced the sanitary sewer rate by 20 cents. So actually, the total combined water and sewer rate actually went down 5 cents for people with that water rate increase last. Here's a quick kind of summary of where we see the water fund projections over the next 5 years. So the green or the orange, gray, and yellow pretty much make up the operating expenses. So that's personnel, operating costs like utilities, repairs and maintenance, and the debt on the outstanding debt within the water fund. That red line being the operating revenues coming in. And I want to point out though that these are all revenues coming into the water fund. So this is water sales. This is money received for renting out cell towers on the water towers. This is anytime we have new business coming in with connection fees and permit fees. So if I were to pull all those extra kind of revenues out that come in on an annual basis and just said just water sales, you know, that red line would drop a little bit. So we'd actually probably be below where our operating expenses are on an annual basis, just knowing that some of the extra things come up actually get us above our operating. The blue being the capital. So over the next 5 years, we're putting together a plan where we're assuming about $2 million every year or $10 million over the next 5 years of capital projects going into the water fund. So I mentioned we have a current reserve of about 7.6 million. Some of that's going to be spent down. So if we actually didn't raise rates at all over the next 3 years, we'd probably use all that reserve to the point where come 2025, 26, we'd probably be sitting on no reserve with no money going forward to pay for any of the planned capital. So that's kind of where we're coming at with this need for a water rate increase. You know, I mentioned the capital projects coming up. Over the next 10 years, we're anticipating just under $15 million of water main replacements. We've got treatment plant improvements at about $2.5 million. We still have the lead service line replacements, which we're going into now, but we could see that anywhere from $2 to $4 million. And then if we build the central water tower, that could be another just under $5 million. But as I mentioned, we're kind of looking at that target of $2 million over the next 5 years between all of these. Just even in the next 5 years, we're expecting about 7.5 million, about half of that water main replacements to occur over the next 5 years. So this is the water rate model that we presented last time that the board seemed to favor more than the $16 increase. So it'd be starting with the next year, a 15% increase. So you see the water rate on that second line goes from $3.70 to $4.26 per 1,000. So we estimated a bill of $11,000 bi-monthly. So essentially the first 3,000 are covered, and then we're billing at 8,000 extra. So somebody's bill under those circumstances would go on the water charges from $45.60 to $50.08. So about a $4.48 increase on the average user every other month. And again, I mentioned that these rate increases are helped offset by we're using some reserve of 4.7 million and then the ARPA money at 2.4 million. So if we said we didn't have any of that money, some of these rates would probably be higher than that. So we're just kind of spending down some reserve balance that we have. Some of the comparables. So these are assuming that the yellow at the bottom, that 15% rate increase took effect June 1st, we'd have a $4.26 per 1,000. Our average bill of 11,000 would be approximately $50.08. And here's how we stack up. We're significantly cheaper on both the per 1,000 and then the total charge from a lot of our neighbors. One note I did mention off to the side there was that going back to that previous slide where I said, kind of here's what our rate would be at the end of 5 years. If we just skipped all the way down to that 5th year and we just said, all right, we're doing the $5.95 per 1,000 charge, we'd have an estimated bill of $63.60, which compared to all our neighbors and what their current rates are now, our estimated bill at 11,000 would still be lower than everybody else. Our per 1,000 would be kind of right in the middle, but we'd still have the cheapest water bills on average for somebody who uses 11,000. So the question came up about high users and kind of what is a high user. So we wanted to break down a little bit of kind of where all our accounts fit. So these are some averages over a year. Sometimes it can fluctuate season by season, more people using more water in the winter, but on average, this is kind of where we stand. Approximately 6,000 residential users. They use about 51% of all the water. We have 287 commercial accounts using 44% of the water. And there's a few apartment accounts that use a little bit of the water. So from there, the residential accounts I mentioned, if you look at the first categories, the 0 to 3,000.
Sorry, real quick, before we get into this, because it gets a little confusing with the apartments. The apartment accounts are typically multi-units in one. So when you see the numbers, when we show you apartments, it could be for a building of like 18 units. So just want to put that in, it's not necessarily individual units.
Yeah. So the first category mentioned is 0 to 3,000. So these are people that just get billed the $16 on average bi-monthly. Makes up about 14.5% of the accounts. From there, we go to the 4,000 to 10,000, the 11,000 to 20, and so on. 96.4% of all residential users use 20,000 gallons or less on a bi-monthly average. So that's kind of where the bulk of, and I think I mentioned last time, maybe a number around 15 or 20,000 is that a high user? That's kind of where the majority of all the residential users are sitting in that 20,000 range, or 20,000 or less. Even on the commercial side, 175 accounts on average are using 20,000 gallons bi-monthly or less. So a lot of these commercial accounts, whether it's small restaurants, small retail, they're basically using what residential are using. It's really just those larger accounts that is really driving a lot of the water. I mean, you could look, we have four accounts of all the commercial that use 71% of all the commercial water. And even those four accounts use probably about 30% of all the water in the whole system. So almost a third of the water usage just comes from four accounts we have on within the village. So then Steve mentioned the apartment accounts. It does get kind of confusing because these are just accounts by building. And I have an example there, the Springs. The Springs Apartments has 17 different accounts with us. So within each account, they could be however many units, however many people. So the apartment accounts, we just gave it as the breakdown, but that one gets a little confusing because we can't divvy it up by person or by account.
So that's why I said it was hard to consider whether an apartment is a high user, because if they have a bill of 100,000 gallons, but they have 20 units, if you divide it by 20, all of a sudden it puts it back into a normal residential range.
So what we did, and we have other numbers we did too, but I just kind of picked one for the time being, is looking at a potential high user. So we can't kind of pick and choose who's a high user, who an extra fee goes to, or who can't. We got to kind of group and categorize these. So, and again, another thing we want to point out is all users pay a connection fee. So whether it's a single family home coming in or a new business, they get assessed a fee right off the bat of saying, here's what you're paying to connect to our water system. I mean, we've seen commercial ones well over $30,000 to connection fee, or single family home, I think, is around $3,000. So everybody pays, a fee to have their meter when their meter comes in. So people pay right off the bat just to join the water system.
So Jason,
yeah.
You had said something about not being able to assess or not being able to, I'm thinking, when I brought up this discussion for myself last time, I was thinking more of the four who use 30%, not the apartments, but the industrial people that are consuming the water, not so much to make money for the village, but to help us get them to kind of do everything they can do to curb as much as they can, and they operate as economically as possible. That's my thinking on this whole thing. It wasn't to tax every Tom, Dick, and Harry if they use a lot of water. It was to take a look at high use individuals, the four I'm talking about, not the apartments. So
yeah,
keep that in mind as you proceed. I think it's fair to at least consider, and if you don't want to specify an individual, which I know wouldn't be kosher or legal. We could certainly draw a line at a certain level of use and above, and then tax that at a higher level. Up to that level, they pay what everyone else pays. Then above that, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, and that's kind of what in this graph I have here, that's kind of what we tried to do is if you look at the first row on here is kind of the option we presented, where $4.26 is what the rate is. That includes a 15% rate increase come June 1st. Below there, then we said, okay, the threshold is 100,000 gallons. So anything up to 100,000 gallons on a bi-monthly, you just get charged the regular rate. Every 1,000 gallons above that, we're going to charge an extra $2 on top of that. So what I wanted to do was just show whether we're calling it 100,000, 250,000, 500,000, or a million. If we just said we took all those thresholds and we just said in each one of those, if we just said, okay, $2 per thousand more on top of the regular standard rate, how much revenue would that actually bring into the village? And on the flip side, how much would that basically alleviate any of those rate increases, to where we could say, rather than a 15% or 50% over 5 years, we can get a 5-year 26% because all that extra revenue we're bringing in. So, you know, like I mentioned here, if we hit just those four that are doing a million, and we said, okay, everything above 1 million gallons, you're doing on a bi-monthly basis, you're paying extra $2. That'd be an extra $341,000.
You said a million, you meant 100,000, right?
1 million. So we have those four users every other month are doing 1 million gallons or more.
Okay. And they're the ones that are assessed to $2 extra.
Currently, no, they just pay the 370. Everybody pays 370, whether you're using 5,000 gallons or a million gallons.
Jason ran a whole bunch of scenarios. He just put $2 down as just the basis across the board for example purposes.
So I got a question for you. So if you're looking at the $2 surcharge and the $1 million user, he's paying, or whoever the business owner is paying $341,280 a year extra?
Between the four users, yeah, that would be an extra $340,000 coming in just on the surcharge, just on that $2 surcharge.
That doesn't account what the added pay that business has to pay with the standard increase. Is that
Right.
above?
So it's above the standard increase.
They would have their normal water bill, and then that's just a surcharge, what that revenue would generate.
No, that's.
So what we're showing is if we had a surcharge and just hypothetically $2, rather than a $4.26 per 1,000, we'd be able to get a 10% increase. So call it $4.07. So everything up to $1 million, they paid $4.07. Then $1 million and above, they'd pay $6.07.
So let's say that is the case, and we go, yeah, that's what we want to do and all that. So let's say we 341,000. So what's that going to save the residents? Let's say we're like, okay, that's really what we want to do because we think they're, the system's taxed because of this. So we charge them $2 more per thousand. What's that save like me?
Yeah. So if our rate in this scenario then was, but the resident rate was $4.07, going back to that 11,000 average, it probably saved about $1.52 bi-monthly. So a little over $9 a year.
It's really not
It
not what you think it would be.
It doesn't move the needle a ton.
Yeah. Other than,
But it gives you room the next time we have to raise water rates.
Right.
Like, because if we build this in, it's 341,000 divided by 4 right now. So it's what is that? Like 80,000 or
85,000 roughly.
and the 607 is still equivalent to the other villages, right? I mean, if you bring up the chart where you show the comparison, the 607 is still not out of line with Aurora 775, Geneva 710. I mean, Yorkville, St. Charles, and Batavia are the only communities in South Elgin that are less than
Sugar Grove. But then you're taxing a business again.
Yeah. But logically though, if we calculated our costs right, or $4.10 per thousand, they should be paying their fair rate no matter what water they use, unless we say, hey, we have to have this super duper treatment plant because of them, or something we can tie back to business. I'm not sure if we can say, yeah, we need a water main line on Harmony Drive. We're going to charge some of the businesses more for that. You know, I don't know if that's their, you know, is it because they're using that water? But I mean, our calculations though, we should be paying, if you turn that faucet on, you should be paying for the water, unless our, you know, if
I wouldn't be in favor of charging the businesses any more taxes. That's how I feel.
I'm just saying if you can tie it back to business, but just to say, because they use it a lot, I don't know.
I think they pay enough taxes.
That's fair.
One example I just want to give real quick too is a high user surcharge like that would might make us dependent on the operations of various businesses. And we actually did have an example of one of the people who falls within that four is that they used to use significantly more water. And then we noticed a drop in there. And I think we reached out to them and we just said, what's going on? Why did you use significantly less water? You're still above the million, but it's a lot less. And they mentioned that they had changes in their operation to where going forward, they're just using less water now. So, if we built a fee or a fee structure built on that, kind of we'd be tied to whatever they did. So if they changed something significantly, they said, oh, we're not paying $2 extra, we're going to really cut back on our water. Then we'd be in a position then to where come next year, we'd say, well, we're getting a lot less from this than we thought. So now we're just going to have to bump that rate back up to basically make up that difference. So it just makes us a little more dependent on what they're doing. And if something changes significantly with what they're doing, then we're just coming right back.
I mean, it's kind of a rub because you want to conserve water, everybody, but then we also, it's a money generator for the waterworks fund. The more they use, the
They're
more.
getting paid anyways. They got to
Yeah.
use it. They're paying the higher rate.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have,
You
the
want to
flexi-
tax them even more? I don't know. I don't know.
but we have the flexibility to increase rates, annually or whenever we think we would need to forecast additional revenue. I mean, I agree with Mark. I don't think we should be charging businesses anymore. It's a consumption-based commodity. It's not, I mean, are you going to charge somebody who goes to McDonald's and orders 5 Big Macs more than the guy that orders 1? I don't see the logic in it.
Yeah, so the plan going into this was, and like I said, Jason said, we brought this back because the board wanted to see what the commercial accounts was. Regardless of what the board does, I will say the breakdown was very interesting to actually see which categories people fall in and really do an analysis to see what kind of users we have on the residential side as well. Big thing up there, the big bullet point was commercial revenues help fund residential capital projects. It's a balance. So, everyone pays into the system, but as the mayor alluded to, sometimes once the infrastructure is already in the ground and they're paying for that revenue that is going into the system, it's their proportional share for the bill that's huge that they're paying is then that revenue that goes towards a water main replacement in a neighborhood where collectively the people in that neighborhood's water bills wouldn't add up to enough to pay for their water main replacement. So it kind of smooths out by doing it proportionally. That's why most towns have it that way, I'm assuming.
Todd, any thought?
Yeah, no, my opinion is the same as last month. Just it should be the same rate for everybody. The more you use, the more you pay anyway. So I wouldn't be in favor of the surcharge.
Okay.
And these can be viewed annually. That was the other big thing Jason wanted to point out. This is a 5-year plan because we know we have to do projects, and we've had a history here at the village where we've never come to the board and really pushed for water rate increases unless there was a reason to do it. Now we're getting to that point in our history where improvements are needed for the water system. We see them. They're not necessarily right here at the door. Some of them might be, but we need to start planning for them. And so the idea is every year we come back during this 5 years and we bring it up. So it's 15% next year. We come back and say, all right, last year we said it was going to be 12.5 the second year. This is where we are. This is what came in. Maybe a business came in town that uses more water. Maybe that means less of a water rate increase next year. Those are the things we'd have to analyze every year.
Basically, just everybody pays a little bit more for water. We're still the cheapest in the valley.
All right. Anything more, Steve? Yeah.
Just real quick. I just want to recap. So kind of where we were at is 15% increase come June 1st. like Steve mentioned, a planned 50% over 5 years, but that number could change. Just every year, we're going to revisit it and come back and determine, passing an ordinance if we have to change rates. As I mentioned, we have a significant amount of capital and operations over the next 5 years, but these rates that we're proposing are going to make sure that we're still being able to pay for everything and maintain a significant reserve balance, at least 50% over the next 5 years. Low users I mentioned are going to see little to no impact. I think I mentioned either some people are going to see nothing or 50 cents, $1 increase every other month. So, but again, we're going to have that uniform rate for all users. So whether you use 5,000 gallons or 1,000,000 gallons, you're paying your fair share of the same rate. So the next steps, we determined, it sounds like the high user rate is really not something people are in favor of. So we'd kind of start developing the budget, assuming that 15% rate increase. But then come May, once we actually pass the budget or getting ready to pass the budget, we'd bring an ordinance back to the village board just to actually approve that rate increase, and then monitor going forward just to make sure what the appropriate rate increases for future years are.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Great report. That ends our discussion. Motion to adjourn, and we'll be going into executive session to discuss collective bargaining.
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. All right.